America's first war crimes trial since World War II ended today with a guilty verdict. A military tribunal in Guantanamo Bay convicted Salim Hamdan, once Osama bin Laden's chauffeur, of abetting terrorism, but acquitted him on another charge of plotting murder. The trial is the first since the controversial detainee camp opened 6 years ago. And today's verdict was immediately criticised as a legal sham by human rights groups. In a moment, we'll go live to Cuba, but first of all, we start our coverage with the BBC's Adam Brooks.
At Guantanamo Bay, a milestone. After 6.5 years of incarceration, an inmate of these prison camps has had a full trial and has been found guilty of a crime. But the endless, rancorous argument over whether the proceedings here are just was not resolved today. The man convicted was Osama bin Laden's personal driver, Salim Hamdan from Yemen. The special court run by the US military found him guilty of supporting terrorism, but it acquitted him of the more serious charge of conspiring to commit terrorism. The prosecution called Hamdan a trusted assistant to bin Laden from 1996 onwards. All through the years, Al-Qaeda struck at US embassies in East Africa, bombed the American warship, the USS Cole, and, of course, planned 9/11. Hamdan knew about all of it, said the prosecution, but did nothing. Hamdan's defense lawyers argued that he was only a minor player, a driver and mechanic with no role in Al-Qaeda's planning. When the guilty verdict was announced, Hamdan sat with his head in his hands. But by acquitting him on those conspiracy charges, the military jury seems to have accepted that he was just a minor player, not a plotter. Nonetheless, legal activists derided the proceedings.
No, I'm not surprised by the verdict of guilt because this was a hand-picked jury with unfair rules of evidence, coerced evidence, and unfair charges, and tried in an environment in which basically secrecy was the hallmark.
For years now, these activists have tried to stop the trials from going ahead. Too much secrecy in the courtroom, they say, and special rules of evidence and coerced confessions, perhaps even torture, mean that the trials can never be fair. But that's all a fallacy, says the US military.
Mr. Hamdan did receive a full and fair trial. He was convicted of material support to terrorism, 5 specifications out of 8 that he was charged with. And as we can see, the military commission's process is moving forward.
But even the United States Supreme Court has over the years questioned the way that detainees are held and put on trial in Guantanamo Bay. So we can expect that Salim Hamdan will appeal against his conviction. We can also expect that more of these military trials will get underway. And the defendants won't just be drivers. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, allegedly the architect of 9/11, may be among them. Today's verdict was perhaps just a practice run for many more, much more controversial cases to come. Adam Brooks, BBC News, Washington.
And the BBC's State Department correspondent Kim Katas is in Guantanamo Bay. She joins us live now. Kim, you were there as the verdict was read out. What happened?
The verdict was read out after the judge had gone through it, and it took him a while because it was a complex worksheet that the 6 anonymous American officers had to go through to determine on which counts of those 10 counts Salim Hamdan was guilty. And in the end, as you heard just there, the most serious charges of conspiracy to commit murder and attack civilians were dismissed. And the count that remains, the 5 counts that remain, have been merged into one now, according to the judge, that of belonging to an international terror organization, Al-Qaeda.
The White House has, of course, says that this was a perfectly fair trial. The defense lawyers are down there at Guantanamo Bay with you. What are they saying?
Yes, I've been speaking to one of them, Lieutenant Commander Brian Miser, who's very passionate about why he needs to be on this defense team, why he needs to be defending people like Salim Hamdan. He says it's important for the laws of this country, for the US, for the constitution of this country. And he basically calls this trial a farce because no matter what the verdict was going to be, Mr. Hamdan was going to go back to his cell in Guantanamo. If found guilty, he faces life in prison. But even if he had been acquitted on all charges, the US administration can still hold him indefinitely indefinitely because of the rules that it has in place at the moment for its war on terror. Now, Brian Miser also said that he was satisfied with the verdict, although they are going to appeal. And he also pointed to the fact that now is the time of the sentencing. The hearings for the sentencing have started. And he said there is a possibility that if the jury is convinced that indeed Mr. Hamdan is just a lowly driver, the sentence does not necessarily have to go up to life in prison. And he points to the fact that in federal courts in the U.S., such a charge would only get him 15 years in prison.
Okay.